I'm looking at the surface winds across the continental U.S. here this morning, and there's not too much to pick out at this point. I'm looking off the east coast of the U.S. There's a deep low there up near the Canadian Maritimes. That's been somewhat of a common theme here this year. Just off the coast of the Bay Area, there's this kind of weak remnant low. We had that deeper low sort of come onshore last night. That's somewhere like trying to reform over the Four Corners region. And here, we're going to see some precipitation pick up kind of there and then over into the southern plains, just kind of over the next 48 hours. But across kind of the continent, not too much going on. You can see if you look closely, there's this broad kind of southerly flow, at least kind of west of like the Ohio River. So bringing some of those warmer temp up into the area. If you look, near the bottom of this map, you can see maybe the Toronto Gap winds kind of racing through there. But that warm southerly flow coming up. We're starting to warm up across the continental U.S. I've enjoyed some warmer days, particularly in the central plains, getting out into the Midwest here this week as well. If you look just this morning, about 6:20 a.m. Central Time, still freezing across portions of the Mid-South, Eastern Midwest, up in the Northern Plains, but it's 6:20 in the middle of early February, so that's not unheard of by any means. Starting to push that warmth further up into the interior of the U.S. We've been melting the snow as we've been doing that, particularly over the Midwest and the Mid-South. If we jump over and just look at the kind of continental U.S. view, this was yesterday. You can see that snow line. It's hard to kind of pick that out amongst the clouds here, but it's like somewhere in here. Whereas last week, right, that was like way back here with snow all through this area. So starting to melt some of this, hoping to get that into the ground. Eric showed you the soil moistures yesterday. Looked here today, not much updates. So we know we're still dry in here. We're getting a little bit, maybe a half inch to a quarter inch of water starting to get into the soil from that snow, but we're going to need more. We're looking at that, and we're looking for it in the forecast because we have this overwinter drought. We've had that so often this decade. That's something we'll have to keep an eye on going into the spring of 26 as well. As I mentioned, not too much going on across the continental U.S. We can see that with the CONUS radar here. We have some light rain showers. I'm trying to get into Iowa here. These are expected to weaken as we go through the morning. Mentioned that low trying to form over the Four Corners. Can see some snow showers sprinkling in here into the Colorado plateau, over here into the mid-Atlantic, portions of New York, upstate Pennsylvania. You can see some light snow showers, but even here, no winter weather advisories save for just portions of upstate New York. So not too much going on until this low gets out into the southern plains here as we go through the next few days. Look at the high temperatures here this morning. This is Thursday. Let's go into Friday because they just continue. So you see those highs across the northern plains, 70s across Texas, kind of 60s and 50s further north of that. Still cold across the mid-Atlantic, eastern Corn Belt. But as I go into tomorrow and Friday, we're spreading that warmth to the east. So now Ohio, Kentucky, even West Virginia, getting back toward like normal temperatures, western North Carolina, Virginia. Let's go all the way into Saturday, now into the weekend. And we have above average temperatures finally, at least close to average, but above average all the way through New England, even into cities like DC, closer to New York, looking at 40-degree Fahrenheit temperatures. So finally a break from just the oppressive cold that has been locked into this corridor so often over the last kind of 4 to 5 weeks. Staying very warm across the northern plains. This will kind of finish out, I think, this snowmelt. We'll have to get more, and maybe later in February, maybe early March for areas kind of more toward the north that can still get it that time of year. But this is going to do a lot of work melting the snow that is still on the ground in some of those areas that we just looked at. And that warmth extends back to the west, especially the interior. I mean, the only areas on this map that are really kind of below average are underneath the precipitation across the high plains and then far over toward the Pacific Northwest. It continues on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. I mean, that warmth just continues. And now we're getting into that more amplified sort of pattern shift that we've been talking about where the west stays cooler, more troughing, heavier precipitation there next week, snow, needed snow coming for some of the mountain areas there, but staying warm in the central and eastern U.S., save for the kind of far west plains here over Montana, just getting under the influence of that deeper trough over the western U.S. If I take this out into the precipitation story, this is just from the ECMWF. I'm going to update this, make sure totally current. Play this forward. I mentioned that Four Corners low. It's kind of hiding in here as I take this through tomorrow into Friday. And then finally, very early Saturday, midnight, there's that low coming off the New Mexican mountains and then forming over Texas. So Oklahoma, West Texas precipitation, some snow showers up in the mountains. That forms more coherent low midday Saturday over Oklahoma. Heavier rain spreading across the central southern plains, getting into Missouri and Arkansas. And by Sunday, should say Saturday night, kind of dinner time Saturday, expecting storms, thunder across East Texas, maybe even up into Arkansas. That continues overnight, midnight, perhaps even strengthening slightly into western Louisiana. Rain getting all the way up into the Ohio River Valley now, southern, south central Illinois, southern Indiana. It continues across Mississippi into the Sunday morning. And then maybe Sunday evening, again, back near dinner time, some storms here, maybe over like the southern half of Georgia, the Florida Panhandle. I'm not expecting as widespread of a kind of convective thunderstorm event on Sunday as maybe we'll see in Texas and Louisiana, but at least thunder in the forecast. And earlier this week, we shared the possibility that, we could have a backside snow event somewhere here over the mid-Atlantic, maybe even for New York, some of these more populated areas. But the latest model runs, they're shifting this run further to the south. They're making this high just to the north of it over Maine stronger. That's just keeping it kind of pushed out to sea, which I just mentioned has been such a common theme here. Struggling to wrap up, that backside snow. So I'm going to play this forecast forward Monday into Tuesday. And there it goes, kind of racing out into the Atlantic. While that's happening, we're seeing another much stronger low come on shore over in California, portions of Oregon. I'm going to reverse this just a bit to focus on that. So you can see that coming into fray maybe Sunday evening. Rain showers starting across central and northern California through Sunday evening into Monday morning. Really the strongest effects are expected later Monday, maybe even into early Tuesday, with heavy snow up and down the Sierras, heavy snow for the transverse ranges, heavy rain for Southern California all the way up the coast, and even Oregon. Some snow into Oregon, portions of western Washington, and then really kind of coming all the way across the west. I mentioned those Montana temperatures dropping, snow expected there, through Wyoming, heavier precipitation, Wasatch Range, all the way through western Colorado, northern Arizona. The Sierras just getting dumped on at this point next Tuesday. This is a prolific, west trough. Temperatures coming down, heavy rain for California, potentially portions of Arizona, heavy snow for just about every interior mountain region, including the Sierras and east. And that continues through Wednesday. You can imagine there's likely at some point to be some low coming out into the central U.S. We're seeing that somewhere through Nebraska into Iowa. That rain snow line probably positioned well up there, looking like up near I-90 and north, Canadian Prairie, through Saskatchewan, down through North Dakota into Minnesota. Heavy snow, but we're seeing with some of these latest model runs, it's shifting further to the north. There were some kind of earlier this week that tried to bring that rain snow line a little bit further south, but this has been kind of migrating up to the north. But all the while, this is through Wednesday. Can still see another low coming through near Oregon, bring heavier rain back to California later in the week as this low kind of shifts across the northern part of the continental U.S. before getting out to the east. And that next one coming in behind it on Friday is likely to kick out another low somewhere in the central to north central part of the United States. We'll have to keep an eye on that. That's all the way out Saturday of next week. So in the exact position of that, whether Minnesota, Wisconsin is going to get snow next weekend, unclear as of yet where this kind of the trajectory of this low will end up. Not dissimilar from where the one that came through before. It was kind of a just a glimmer at the end of last week, but it is a possibility, especially with that deep troughing out west, to launch one of these elite cyclones somewhere across the central U.S. next week and all the way out like February 21st. Storm Prediction Center highlighting an area, again, across that kind of same geography I just mentioned, eastern Texas, southeastern Oklahoma, far southwest Arkansas, Louisiana Saturday night. I would expect kind of a similar risk area maybe somewhere here going into that next Sunday evening as that low tracks across on Sunday. But storms coming for the southeast. You'd think decent rainfall potential across both the mid-south, portions of the southern plains, and the southeast as a result of that as well. I do want to look over at the GFS really quickly. Surprisingly, between the two, the ECMWF and the GFS, decent agreement, even out into the long range. On this system, you can see that low spinning up in the southern plains. We take that through Saturday evening. You can see that convection through Louisiana, East Texas, similar areas, southern Arkansas, maybe in Little Rock. As we go through Sunday night, those thunderstorms shift more so over the Florida Panhandle, South Georgia, rain across the southeast up into the North Carolina, even Virginia. That next low coming on scene here as we go into Monday. Heavy precip for the Sierra Nevadas through Southern California, all the way up the Oregon coastline. Cascades getting out some of that snow. Waiting for that first low to come out, and from Nebraska to Iowa, we see that rain snow line lining up really nicely right through the Canadian Prairie, through North Dakota, Minnesota. So good agreement here from the GFS. Now there's that next system coming in behind it Thursday and Friday. See that, and that low, they kick theirs off much further to the south, maybe a little bit weaker, but look at how much further south that rain snow line is versus that second low versus the ECMWF. So again, all the way out next Saturday, February 21st, I would expect decent disagreement between those two. But by and large, the evolution of that trough was pretty similar between the two. The wind risk with these lows kind of spinning up into the plains, as you'd imagine, higher across the south central portion of the interior, both through West Texas, the high plains, even getting out into the kind of central plains here. That really getting through kind of the middle part of next week when those deeper lows start to form. I can kind of show you that. Let's see if I have the wind forecast up here. This is from the GFS. We'll take this through this weekend quickly. Surprisingly, you'll notice the west, despite that deeper trough, we're not seeing super steep low pressure development. So as a result of that, not seeing as gusty of winds for like the coast of California. But getting into Monday and Tuesday now, some light winds through the Central Plains, kind of a gusty day there Monday and Tuesday. But really the stronger winds expected later Tuesday evening into Wednesday as that low comes out into the middle part of the country there, that Nebraska to Iowa low. So by that point, you're looking at strong wind gusts through the Front Range, eastern New Mexico, near the Raton Mesa there, extending all the way through western Missouri, even some gusty winds getting over into the Midwest with those lows coming through. Take that forecast a little bit for Friday and Saturday, probably a similar area, looking at some gusty winds late next week with that second low. But looking over to the western U.S., despite that deep trough, not seeing some of those concerning wind gusts, thankfully. Double back really quick. With all that activity, I'll show you the 10-day precipitation anomaly from the ECMWF. As you can imagine, healthier precipitation across the western region. A lot of that coming down to snowfall kind of east of California. There's that second system. Actually, that's that first system on Wednesday coming through the northern plains. You can see Minnesota, North Dakota, right through the Canadian prairie. And then with that low coming out in the middle part of the country, both here this weekend and then another one next week, looking at some better rainfall through the south central portions of the interior. There are some areas here that kind of miss out. Western Washington, portions of Oregon, but still these areas expecting rainfall over the next kind of 6 to 7 days. Just, if they miss out on the trajectory of some of these lows, they could end up on the below average side. But they look bone dry on this map, but they're not. There's rainfall coming for kind of both of these areas here. Snowfall forecast from the ECMWF, again, with that kind of rain snow line all the way up here. That second low that came out more so into the Midwest from the ECMWF brought that kind of late snowfall into this area here, but otherwise pretty paltry across much of the eastern continental U.S., save for areas of like upstate, portions of New England and New York. West, obviously getting a healthy dose of snowfall from that persistent troughing through much of next week, particularly the Sierra Nevadas, where forecasts could call for 3 to 4 feet plus in excess of that. But my eyes drawn further to the north. Finally, the Cascades, all the way up and down the north and south Cascades here, even over into eastern Oregon, near Boise, portions of the Idaho mountains, getting over into western Montana. This is a much more widespread western U.S. snowfall. So not focused, on one area of the central or southern Sierras, as some of these events have come through, but much more widespread west precip, even through Arizona, into the Colorado Plateau, the Wasatch Range. Kind of always bundle these together as portions of the Colorado River source region, the upper kind of Colorado, utilizing more of like western Wyoming. But this is an area that's getting some healthy snow out of this, and we need that for the Colorado River, and we need this area to come back over positive because they've been running deficits as well. So this is good to see. It's not going to make up for those deficits, just 1 week of better snowfall, but we'll take it. It'll move us in the right direction going forward. And the reason we've seen that shift more toward the north, the Cascades, less so the Sierras, is getting out in the middle of next week, just looking at the position of that trough. This is from the ECMWF ensemble. I'm going to play this back. And, watch that trough come here and kind of merge with this one. It's kind of making a beeline for the Pacific Northwest. And so we've seen snowfall values trend up there as a result of that, which is why I think, western Washington, western Oregon will get rainfall out of the system despite that 10-day, quote-unquote precipitation deficit. Looking out into the long range, we'll actually do that while I'm at the ECMWF ensemble, the 500 millibar heights. If I play this forecast forward Thursday, Friday, right, that's when we started to see those lows come out somewhere here across the central northern part of the country. So in a lot of those models, they kind of raced quickly through the mid-Atlantic, bringing some precipitation there in the form of rain and snow. I'm trying to see if we're going to now flip this pattern flip as we get further out into the forecast, like the 21st and beyond. I just don't see a strong signal. I still see this trough anchored over the Pacific Northwest, flow coming around like that, lows coming through here, windy in that same corridor that we looked at even out through next week and into that next week. Warm across the eastern U.S., perhaps dry across the southeast without that kind of flow coming out of that direction, more so a little bit toward the northwest. But again, we're all the way out. We're past 10 days at this point, and I'm just kind of looking at the broad yin-yang of where we're going in North America, and I don't see a strong flip back toward cold for the Midwest or the eastern U.S. in this pattern. We've mentioned that we're kind of loading some of that cold air across the Canadian prairie. That potential is there, but we need something to kick it out through the middle to eastern part of the country. And I don't see it till I drag that forecast bar all the way to the right. This is, getting up 15 days at this point, and that's not enough to, really even call a strong signal at this point here. I mean, we'll keep an eye on it, but I don't see a huge pattern flip right now. We are there is that potential for it. Eric mentioned it yesterday, that stratospheric polar vortex splitting. Is that Arctic air outbreak, that we typically associate with those coming right after the 26th of February? That's not clear. This pattern could be persistent, but there is that possibility at the very end of the month, maybe early March, that we flip this around. If we look in the long range for precip, I'm just looking left to right across the CPC, ECMWF ensemble, the ECMWF AI model, and then the GFS ensemble, and we stay wet across the west. If anything, maybe even more so for the Pacific Northwest and the Cascades. I mentioned that trough looking a little bit stronger there, and the Climate Prediction Center recognizing that with their highest values up there in Washington, Oregon, and portions of northern Idaho there, the Panhandle. We do see some of those lows. I mentioned racing across the Mid-Atlantic. You can see that in kind of all four of the panel there with more precipitation there. But you'll see the southern plains and the southeast, save for the AI model, going over drier in the long range. I mentioned that kind of signal where if I take this back to like the 21st, somewhere here, that ridge kind of re-anchoring across the southeast, and some of that flow kind of backing more so up into the northern plains, the mid-Atlantic, less so coming right through the southern plains. So have to keep an eye on that, given that kind of pre-existing drought across the southern U.S., stretching all the way over toward the southeast. So rain here this week, obviously over the next kind of 3 to 4 days through the weekend, expecting those lows to come through with those thunderstorm chances. But despite rain this winter, we've just been below average. We haven't kept into a persistent rainfall pattern in this quarter here. We've been cold. We've added those hard freezes that can dry out some vegetation, and worried about these deficits going into the new year, going into spring, especially if we start to lack rainfall and start to back this up more so into the south central portion of the kind of plains right here. If we start seeing expanding there, we're going to be more concerned about that area expanding further to the north. We get the long range temperatures. You heard me mention we're kind of loading that cold up in the Canadian prairie. You can see that in some of these longer range forecasts here, but what you don't see in the right panel that takes us out near the end of February is a big kind of spilling out of that cold. We're still warm across the middle and eastern part of the country. And just about every one of these models. So while we have the cold up in Canada, Western North America, we're still locked into that kind of warmer pattern through that third week of February. Now, if the pattern flip is coming, we're not seeing it there. We can confirm that in the Hobmuller diagram. So again, looking at this black line is the present day. As you go down on the chart, you're going out into the forecast all the way out to February 27th. Here's North America here. So obviously, long-range forecast, we have the trough here positioned right across the eastern U.S. It gets more expansive in the long range, but you can start to see that kind of retrograde action that a lot of these troughs and ridges have in the long range, like this one here, this trough here. And if that keeps retrograding into the forecast, if anything, we're pulling that ridge more so back, right over the interior of the U.S. and keeping that warmth around through the middle part of the country even longer. Maybe bringing New England back into some cold in the long range, but I don't see an obvious signal that we're going to spill out that Arctic air at the end of February yet. It's just not there right now. ECMWF MJO forecast, I kind of touched on this yesterday. We are kind of watching that phase 3 for more interior cold, but we're also seeing it kind of dive back toward null space. We start to lose some signal here. So don't see a great story here for the long range pattern flip, the flip of the flip, if you will. I will mention we are keeping an eye on La Niña quickly fading now. It's been actually impressive since middle of January through the early part of February, how quickly we've seen those cold ocean temperatures just degrade across the middle part of the Pacific here. I can just jump over and show that to you. That cold water signature just tied up right here, dead smack in the middle of the central Pacific. A lot of warm water kind of flanking it on all sides, to the south and to the north. So this is starting to look less La Niña-y. We're even seeing some warm water pick up right over the Galapagos there, far eastern Pacific. We actually call this El Niño 1+2. And if we look at the values for El Niño 1 and 2, they're skyrocketing since January, actually getting into positive territory. You can see those warm waters there. And so what happens when that occurs, we get more convection, more tropical thunderstorms in this region here. The jet stream starts to feel that, starts to emanate out in that direction. You can actually get better flow across the southeast. I'm kind of keeping an eye on that. That's kind of maybe a backdoor to get some precipitation into the southeast. So I mentioned that drought concern. We saw those precipitation deficits over the last 60 days, all those beige colors in this corridor here. You start getting convection back into here. That's pretty El Nino-y, because that can then extend out further into the central Pacific, but you can see that we get this kind of component of the jet stream flowing up into there. So I actually went back and I correlated El Nino 1 and 2 values with precipitation across the U.S. in March and April, so through spring, at least the first half of it. And these correlation values aren't high. These like blue colors here, maybe 0.2 to 0.3. The highest one's kind of right in here across the southeast, getting up into like 0.3, maybe 0.4. And again, that's because that subtropical jet gets kind of lifted up by those thunderstorms in the eastern Pacific. I wouldn't put too much weight on the values further to the north. Again, you're talking like maybe, minus 0.3 up in a small area here, but this is like 0.1 or 0.2 across the middle part of the country. But kind of keep an eye on that, with that El Nino 1 and 2 headed in the right direction here for better rainfall chances. Looking across Europe really quickly, kind of wondering, where is the warmth right now? It's over the U.S. Where's the cold air? And a lot of it's over Europe, particularly Eastern Europe here, Northern Europe, through this next week, and then even taking this forecast further out. Much of the continent at this point, from Portugal all the way over to Moscow, much colder than average, save for maybe portions of Greece here. So if you're wondering where the cold is, it's not coming for the central or eastern part of North America right now, but it is kind of locked in over Europe. South America, over the next 7 days, we're mentioning a thunderstorm potential across northern Argentina, Uruguay, which has been dry for portions of the last 30 to 60 days, for southern Brazil, finally getting on the rainfall there. So some of these higher values just very indicative of getting into those kind of late summer thunderstorms there across Argentina. Going a little bit drier over kind of south central Brazil, some of the largest growing regions in here, probably allowing them to kind of trade that crop over. So getting the soybeans out and getting the last of the corn crop in right now, which was a little bit behind just on progress, but expecting that to pick up in a big way as a result of this relative lack of rainfall over the next 7 days. And the long range forecast there, we start to see central Brazil fill back in. Uruguay, for southern Brazil, go back over a little bit drier, but northern Argentina is still seeing that kind of wet signal there. That was an area with more drought pressure there, so finally getting better rains through that 14-day forecast. Also, just looking at this long-range forecast, this is February 20th through the 26th. Notice this area here kind of caught my eye near the Galapagos. That's that El Nino 1 and 2, and those water temperatures go over much warmer than average. Remember, we just looked at those. That can aid that convection there. And again, you get that like split in the jet stream flow over it. So let's see if I can pull that up. There's those correlations with El Nino 1 and 2. More precipitation off the coast of Peru. And keeping an eye on that because of its effect on the jet stream. So if we look over at the upper level wind speeds here, there's that kind of, you see that little split there around this region. And that can help to bring some flow into the southeast. Kind of coincidentally, we have some flow coming through there this week, and some precipitation and potentially storm chances. So is that the early part of El Nino that's then going to start sticking and moving across the Pacific? That's the kind of question that we'll watch going to February, the end of this month, I should say, and then into March and April. And we invite you to join along with us. I think it's going to be pretty fun. Thanks for watching today. Eric will talk with you all tomorrow.